Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else in the waiting room, so I think we'll just go ahead and get started, and then if people trickle in, that's totally fine. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily Gelke. I work with Rue on this project. I joined sometime like late summer on this project, and I'm also the diversified vegetable educator for Greater Milwaukee area. So today we're going to be covering cut and carry mulch. We have Jeff Schreiber here from Three Sisters Community Farm to talk about his system. But before we jump in, I'm going to turn things over to Stefan. He's just going to give a little overview of some past work that has been covered on cut and carry mulch in this group.
Hey, thanks, Emily. Hey, everybody. Yeah, like Emily said, I'm just gonna take a few minutes to introduce the subject and kind of define what cut and carry mulch is and talk about some things to consider. So I'm going to share my screen. How does that look? Good? Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name's Stefan Mirsky. I also work for UW Extension. I work with Emily and Rue on this climate resilience project. And yeah, just to kind of take a few minutes to introduce this subject, and yeah, go through what it is and some different things to think about. So starting with the definition, cut and carry mulch is basically any organic material that's grown in one location, harvested and spread as mulch in a different location on the same farm. Starting with the growing part, some things to think about are what species do you want to grow? So you probably want to grow a high biomass or a high yielding species. You don't want to grow a species that could potentially transmit diseases to your cash crop. You also want to avoid introducing weed seeds, either from your mulch crop or from any weeds that are growing in it. And then there are annual and perennial options too to think about. And then another thing to think about is how many acres of this mulch crop do you actually need to mulch a given area? As far as the harvesting part and harvest timing, so you want to maximize the amount of biomass for your mulch crop. You want to, like I said, avoid getting any weed seeds in there. Think about your carbon to nitrogen ratio. So the lower the carbon to nitrogen ratio, the more quickly it's probably going to break down. The higher the nitrogen, also the mulch may generate heat as it's breaking down. So that's something to consider if you're putting the mulch right around your plants. And then if you can, if possible, avoid storing the mulch. So if you can harvest it at the same time that your cash crop is going to get mulched, then you avoid all the labor and work involved in storing the mulch. And then also think about what equipment you need for cutting it, chopping it. Are you going to need to chop it into smaller pieces so that it spreads more evenly and uniformly? And then transporting it to where it's going to go. Yeah. And then finally, spreading. So what equipment are you going to need for deploying the mulch where it needs to go and kind of doing the more fine tuning of it, the finer details of spreading it evenly once it's deployed. What is your application rate? So how thick do you want it? And then where are you going to be putting it? You can put it in the pathways or on the bed tops or both. So that's just kind of a real quick, some things to think about as you're doing this. And I want to highlight that we published an article a few months ago, I think it was earlier this year, that describe in more detail a couple of case studies of cut and carry mulch systems. One is from Food Farm that Yannicki Fisher Merritt owns and operates. And then the other one is from Scotch Hill Farm in Broadhead, which is owned by Tony Enns. So yeah, if you want to learn more about a couple different specific examples of cut and carry mulch systems, check out the article. I can drop the link in the chat. And this QR code also will take you to the article. So that's kind of what I had as an introduction to the subject. And I think I'll turn it over to either to Emily or to Jeff to kind of talk about his experiences.
Thanks so much, Stefan. Yeah, Jeff, I'll let you take over here. I think we will hold questions to the end, but if anything is coming up while he's presenting, pop it in the chat and then have plenty of time for questions and discussion after Jeff presents.
Thanks for bearing with me. But yeah, my name's Jeff Schreiber. Good morning. I farm with my wife and farming partner, Ellie Kiefer, here at Three Sisters Farm. We're a little north of Milwaukee. And yeah, this will be our 15th season coming up here next year, and we focus primarily on CSA. We do some other small sales, but we've kind of simplified everything and just focus for the most part on CSA. Yeah, where I'm doing some of this transfer mulch stuff is mostly at this larger acreage, which we have kind of a small site where we live, and we have hoop houses there and greenhouse and packing area. And then a few miles away is this land where we have a long-term lease on this. It's about 30 acres, and it's sort of a unique land situation, which is relevant maybe to this work because I don't know, we wouldn't be able to probably afford this kind of land this close to Milwaukee. So yeah, I don't know. This situation we have kind of allows me the freedom to do things like play around with transfer mulch. But if we own this, I'd probably be working another job or something like that. But yeah, so you can see this site here. I've divided it into quarter acre fields. Is kind of how we manage things, and there's maybe 26 of those or so there, and that's kind of interspersed with these orchard blocks. This lease has given us enough sense of security that we planted a orchard there of 500 or 600 fruit trees, and it's kind of interspersed with the annual vegetable fields. And then there's a pollinator habitat that we're trying to get established there. But so all these plots that I'm showing you are all these kind of quarter acre fields. When I went to do this, I was reminded that I gave a presentation maybe 4 or 5 years ago on transfer mulch, and I completely forgotten about it. But right after we got to this site, I was trying some things where we had these strips, and you could see there's some brassicas, and there's a nice cover of alfalfa. And I was chopping it and trying to move that mulch from the pathways onto these strips using this little kind of walk behind tractor hay rake, which is kind of a cool little thing, and cutting it with a sickle bar mower that was on also the BCS type walk behind tractor. It was cool. I learned a lot from that. There were some things about it. The sickle bar mower didn't, you can see it's kind of pretty long mulch there. It didn't really chop it up in a way that I needed. And there was a lot of creeping into the bed of living alfalfa, and also it just wasn't a big enough base there to generate enough mulch to even mulch that little strip. So it kind of wasn't giving me enough mulch. Um, Also, we just need to plant more densely than this. It was kind of way too extensive. Uh, we weren't, we've got to grow more food than in this kind of single strip sort of system, and we're limited by the land we have. So um, that just got me kind of thinking about other ways to look at some of these ideas. Uh, this was about the time that this German fellow, Jan Hendrik Kropp, I think he had given some presentations at conferences, and I was pretty psyched about this system where he's kind of chopping a cover and then blowing it out of a manure spreader. Um, so I started thinking about what it would mean to do that. Um, I didn't have the equipment really to do that. We had operated for quite a while with a compact tractor and had like a little manure spreader, stuff like that. But that was a little bigger scale equipment than we had. So these are some of my goals, some of the goals that I have with this work. Um, yeah, I want to try to move this mulch material that we're growing. I'm trying to not import a lot of stuff. To me, it'd be really cool if we could grow this and have it on the farm um, rather than importing something in. Um, Also, maybe I should stress that suppressing weeds is kind of one of the main things that I'm after with this because weeds are just a real problem for us. We're not very good at weed management, and that just has repercussions through the whole of our operation. Um, so if there's a way to kind of better manage weeds through such practices, that's kind of what I'm looking for mostly. I make a lot of compost. Um, some of the, well, most of the feedstock is actually imported, but we kind of have some local relationships, so it's not coming from too far. Um, and I'm just kind of wondering on a bigger scale if we can kind of grow more of our own uh, composting materials. That would be really cool too. Yeah, and then just these questions that I had kind of from that first lingering attempt was, how do you plant into this stuff? How does it fit in the crop rotation? How much mulch, kind of like Stefan was talking about, how much mulch do you need? Um, so, yeah, this is kind of what we have been doing. We use a lot of we have always used a lot of this landscape fabric and mostly for cucurbits, which are difficult to weed under. And also, this is a field of our peppers here. So that's a quarter-acre field with landscape fabric um, and our pepper crop. And it grows a great pepper crop. Um, but really, in the longer term, I would like to get away from plastic use. And I mean, it's great we can use these things for 5 years or more before they really start to break down. But I would prefer not to have any plastic on the farm if I could, if we could get there, if we could weed well enough or have a different mulch. Um, that's kind of the goal to get plastic out of here. Um, it's probably, I don't know, but I suspect that microplastics are getting in the soil from it as it breaks down. Um, but that's just kind of a goal to wean ourselves off of plastic if we can. Um, we get a lot of leaves from our village. So actually this year we got all the leaves from our village of 2,500 people, which is a lot of leaves. So we've used it to mulch our garlic, and we did that by hand for a while. It's not that big of a deal on a quarter acre to do that, but I had started using this manure spreader, which I got, and it works very well to spread a nice even covering of the leaf mulch over the planted garlic in the fall, and then the garlic doesn't have any trouble coming up through that in the spring. So it's been really nice for garlic, but garlic comes right up through that, which is nice. So these were some of the tools that I didn't have, and I purchased. That's a flail chopper or a green chopper there on the left. Because we're in sort of dairy country here, these things are pretty easy to find on Facebook Marketplace or wherever. That was it's probably about $2,000 for that, in decent shape. I don't have a place to store it, unfortunately, so it's just been kind of rusting for the last 3 or 4 years. And then I got a little bigger manure spreader there, which has been nice for the leaves and for spreading compost and for trying this mulch work. We did get a little bigger tractor. We had been kind of in need of a little bigger tractor for a while, but that's a 75 horsepower tractor, which is kind of what you need. Need something with a little more power than our compact tractor to use these pieces of equipment. So yeah, I planted this variety of Rustic rye, and I had 2 or 3 fields. Tried this a few years ago, and I just didn't had trouble getting a good stand of it. So, but this year it was really nice. Some real nice stands of rye. I mean, this is probably 6 foot high at the end of May. So, and then, well, I said I didn't want to use plastic, and we've never actually used this kind of plastic, but I think I was just a little worried about in-row weeds, and I've seen other people kind of do this, using this, and I had the equipment to lay this kind of plastic mulch down. We had tried using a paper mulch a few years prior, and I had some of the equipment. The paper mulch, because we're on a bit of a slope here, in my experience, it seemed like you needed really just super flat conditions. Otherwise, it would kind of always stress it, and it was ripping a lot. Super frustrating to lay. But the plastic can take some of that stress. I also, so part of the field there, I wanted to see just what it would mean to plant into just the mulch, uh, the rye. So it was kind of a trial of having this plastic mulch and mulching the pathways there, and then in the rest of it, I wanted to try to see what it would mean to not have the plastic. So you can see there on the right, 2 fields of pretty nice stands of rye there. It wasn't, I didn't necessarily plan it this way, but it turned out to be pretty important that they were in kind of adjacent fields, because it would have been kind of a lot to be dragging all this stuff all over the whole site. So it was pretty nice that it was just kind of right there. So yeah, end of May here, I chopped it. That's what it looked like there. Again, it was about 6 feet tall. Yeah, so behind the tractor was the flail mower, the flail chopper, and then there's kind of a hookup point on the flail chopper to which you can hook up the spreader. So it's kind of a long train of equipment that we don't have very big drive lanes and headlands, so that was pretty challenging to run into the fence and have to figure out how to work my way around the field so I could, because you're not really backing up with this whole array. But yeah, I could kind of sit in the tractor seat, and I don't know, I had a video, but uh, couldn't figure out how to get that in here. But you can sort of see there's like a little mechanism where I can sort of control the the chute there, and it turned out to be pretty necessary to do that, just because if you want to fill the whole of that spreader box, you do have to kind of move that around a little bit and uh, shoot it towards the back of the spreader, and then you kind of shoot it towards the front. I figured out in the end that I could get that thing real full, but I did have to kind of move that little chute around a bit. Um, so yeah, there's starting to spread it um, over one of the beds. That's like one pass there. Um, yeah, there's that hitch I was talking about um, on the chopper. It was not easy actually to hook those things up, and I was constantly having to kind of unhook. I would fill it up, and then I'd have to unhook the chopper and then put the spreader on, and that took a lot of time to do that. Also, you have to go super slow to chop all this material. Um, that tractor has, it's not quite a creeper gear, but pretty close to a creeper gear. And I was only going a little bit faster than that. So it was extremely slow. I just didn't think the tractor could handle uh, chopping that much material, um, going much faster. But you can see that the way that it chops, it's a real nice. One thing about this is just without any modification of the blades or anything like that. It's just a real nice length and mixture of the chop. Pretty ideal to me, kind of mulch there. It was a little moist. I wouldn't have wanted this to sit around and heat up or something like that, but I was just chopping it and spreading it right away. So yeah, you can see that's basically was like one pass there um, in that field, and that would give me about a third of the way down one bed there. So um, it was a lot of material, and it didn't go very far in the field. I got a little antsy, maybe. I was just running out of patience. It was taking a lot of time. This is also like the busiest time of year. We start our PSA deliveries beginning of June usually, so you're kind of racing to get everything in order before you're going to start getting in a rhythm of harvesting and delivering. Um, it's a busy time of year, but it's also the time of year when for these crops, cucurbits and solanaceae, um, it's just really good timing that the rye kind of matches up with those crops. That's why I kind of honed in on those crops and this and the rye. That's the timing is right in the farming year. Um, so yeah, we put some winter squash in there. You can see that the it looks a little thin in places, and it was. Um, we just basically used um, it was going over the whole plastic, and we just basically used like a little broom to sort of sweep it off the plastic. Um, it only took a few minutes to do all that. It was pretty quick. I think I was thinking that more of it would come off of the plastic and fill in the area between the beds. But that wasn't really the case. So, I mean, you can see some soil there. Like I said, I was getting uh, a little anxious to be done with it, especially towards the end of the field. I was like, yeah, that's not going to cut it there. Some of it maybe blew a little bit, but that was at the very end of the field. It wasn't all as bad as that picture on the left there. On the right is that is the field that was chopped, just so you can kind of see how the chop is pretty clean. Not a lot of it's left over in the field, pretty much all gets sucked up there. Um, but yeah, um, so like I said, I wanted to try too. What would it mean to use just our normal kind of water wheel transplanter? Would it make a enough of a kind of a divot in there to all this soil was prepared beforehand too, so it's not exactly no-till here. I work the soil fairly shallowly with our normal, we have a power harrow. Um, so this was loose soil underneath the mulch. And this actually did work pretty well. Those are some peppers that I just threw some peppers in. We had some extras just to kind of see if that was a viable thing. It kind of made a little divot and you can sort of spread out the rest of the mulch with your hand and get that transplant down in there without any plastic mulch being there. But as I mentioned, this is probably a little thin. Um, so would that work with with a thicker covering? I don't know. I think it would be a little more difficult to get that down in there. So there in the middle of June, it's kind of what that field looked like. All right. But by the end of June, you can see how ineffective that was as a mulch. Also, just the kind of weed pressure we have. Um, yeah, it was pretty bad in certain places. Um, I this was me maybe going back and I tried to put some more. I had another field that I had some stuff and I was trying to put some secondary mulch down. That didn't work as well, really. But yeah, there were places where it was okay here, but there were more places on the whole that it just wasn't effective as a weed suppressing mulch. But also the rye I mentioned is a real nice material, but it did kind of like melt down a little bit. Um, I mean, it's beautiful stuff. It's just really not. It's better to me than breaking up a bale of straw or something. But it kind of melted a little bit as it dried. That's what it looked like in July. So it was pretty rough by the end of it. A lot of weeds there. We didn't have very good yields here, but we weren't necessarily relying on it. Um, but yeah, I would not say it was terribly successful there. I think we would have needed probably double the amount of mulch for it to be effective. Um, this was also an unanticipated problem. So after I had cut the rye, I mentioned that we sort of I know fitting this into our rotations and stuff is a challenge. So we kind of need to grow on more land, and so I had kind of planned to put a crop in after the rye crop was there. So I worked it up and I think we put down even our normal sort of mineral fertilizer that we might do before a crop, and we put in some fall broccoli, and this is like the worst broccoli crop I think we've ever grown. It was pretty nasty. You can see it's just really deficient. Um, I think that the rye just like it was so big and it just like sucked up all the nutrients from that field, is my sense. And then we tried to put a pretty heavy feeding crop in there after it, and that did not work. Also, there was just weird weeds. So this weed is not a weed we normally deal with, some kind of grass. But that was really prevalent in the field then. Um, so yeah, that was using that that whole chopper array and stuff. I also um, wanted to try this little more low tech um, idea. This is kind of an old school thing that they would do on farms, often behind a tractor, like in the mid 20th century or something like that. Um, these a buck rake where you're basically cutting hay or something, and then you would kind of drag it across the field with something like this. It acts like a big rake. Um, so I just kind of whipped up this little thing for whatever was laying around. There's some like greenhouse purlins and some little clamp on bucket fork. Um, and this little hay rake I got at Fleet Farm for like $500 or something like that. But it took me a while to figure out how to use that hay rake, but I eventually did. And so I chopped the rye with with the flail chopper, with the green chopper. And you can just kind of open the back and it flies, all the material flies out the back of it. And then I raked it up into these windrows, and you can see you can kind of push that stuff across the field and with the buck rake. And it's pretty cool. You can get like a big wad of the stuff on the bucket. Um, I broke one of the tines. You got to kind of have it so it's level and it's not gonna go into the soil, you know. But it worked fairly well. Um, what didn't work was I was trying to get it into this spreader, and that was kind of silly. I would like drop half of it before I got it in there. Um, Also, this it was gave a little more flexibility because that stuff could sit out there and dry, and then I rake it. I think I had the date on there. Yeah, so that was the end of June. So all of that other stuff was like a month earlier. Um, so this gave a little bit more flexibility. It didn't, however, like spread as well out of the spreader. It was a little more clumpy, dry. It had already dried down, you know, so it wasn't coming out of the beaters quite so uniformly and nicely as the fresh chopped stuff. Um, but yeah, this didn't work. But I think this could be pretty promising if just as like a lower tech kind of thing. If I mean, it wouldn't work to be trying to take this all over the farm, but if you had this in a field next to where you were doing it, you could just kind of bring a load over and dump it, and maybe a couple people with hay rakes could kind of spread it out uniformly. Um, I could sort of do the other thing by myself, which is a benefit, but this this I think could be pretty promising, and you don't really have to use. I guess you're just not using the spreader is all, but I think it could be promising. Yeah, I had so we've been growing this heirloom wheat, and it failed last spring. So in this field, I planted some barley and some sorghum Sudan grass because I thought maybe I would see what it meant to cut those, and try some mulch stuff with that. So there's no barley there. I just cut it. I don't know why I took a picture of that field without any barley, but I the barley was only about half as tall as the rye, and so yeah, it went about half as far. It was just not really worth it because there's not enough material there. Um, I wanted to try. These were some Brussels sprouts that were already growing. Maybe they were 6, 8 inches tall. And I blew the barley over that, and I just kind of with a rake tried to rake it in under the plants. It's just a single row. It was all right, but uh, it seemed to me like the barley seed was not viable, but it turned out that it was, and a bunch of barley then just came up right there in that field, which wasn't very nice. I never got around to trying that sorghum Sudan grass. There wasn't really a lot of it there, but you know, just thinking about the timing, we had some strawberries. I thought maybe mulching the strawberries with, if you chop that at the end of the season after it had kind of uh, maybe got a frost and dried down a little bit. But I never did that. So yeah, this was kind of what I found. I think that this ratio, which is actually what that Jan Hendrik Krop recommended, is kind of a 3-to-1 ratio. I think that is probably correct, something like that. Um, so I wasn't applying it at that ratio, and it wasn't a very good weed mulch. Um, um, yeah, I mean that's challenging to think about then rotation wise for us because, like I mentioned, we're just kind of trying to use a lot of the fields and space is a little tight. Um, so if I was going to do 2 field winter squash, which is what we grow, uh, I would need 6 fields of rye. It's kind of, we don't have 6 fields that I can have in rye, unfortunately. So yeah, I think about how to get this into our rotation. Um, but yeah, probably not trying to put a crop in after the rye. Probably not a good idea. Um, but yeah, I mean, just think about the rotation. Um, I've always really liked this rotation from the Nordells farmers in Pennsylvania. Um, they just have a real beautiful system, and I've wanted to try to get there for a long time, but actually they have some of their stuff on YouTube now, just recently, um, and I was watching it uh, not too long ago, and it made me realize that um, probably where we're failing, where our farm is failing with the weeds, we're just in this kind of vicious cycle with weeds where we do a really good job up until it gets too busy in June, and then weeds are going to seed, and in certain crops like onions, it just gets kind of nasty by the time we harvest. We usually get a good crop, but we have a lot of weed pressure, and then that becomes a kind of vicious cycle from year to year. And we've always planted cover crops, but I think, I mean, it's a little humbling after farming for 20 years to realize this, but I don't think we're really using them effectively um, in the way that the Nordells do here, for instance, by having a whole season where you're not trying to stick vegetables in some way with the cover crops. So they just have this kind of on again, off again year, and these periods of bare fallow also. Um, but I guess it made me realize that maybe mulching is might be helpful, but probably I need to kind of do a better job with just my cover crop management in general, um, to 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 start to address our weed problems. But yeah, that's kind of, so these were pictures that I just stole from the presentation that um, Janet gave that Stefan mentioned there. So a question that just remains for me is, is it best to kind of plant into that mulch or blow it over? Pretty awesome the work that they're doing there, and pretty innovative too to just be blowing it there, but have something to kind of shield the plant. Um, but also, yeah, I mean, where do you need this mulch with the cucurbits? I wanted to have that mulch over the whole area because um, kind of want that fruit to not be just on the soil. But with other things, you could totally like um, like they're doing here, just have a living mulch in the aisle, um, and then you're concentrating that mulch just on the bed top. That would be one way to you know not have to use so much of it. This was a transplanter that Jan Hendrik Krop they use in their farm in Germany. Um, Pretty cool. It's like a disc mower kind of that cuts a little trench in there into the mulch that's already been blown. But that's a pretty specialized piece of equipment. There's really nothing like that over here. Um, so I don't know. I'm wondering how can I just use our regular transplanter in some way, would be a better way for me to go about it. Um, yeah, I had talked with Tony Enns, which was also Stefan also mentioned in this case study, and he had kind of had some extensions that were bolted onto uh, his water wheel transplanter points, and I was kind of trying to borrow those from him or buy them from him, and that didn't work out. So, but that could be something to just try to modify the regular water wheel transplanter to plant into the mulch better. Seems like a promising direction for me. For me. And then these were just pictures I stole also from. This is from Dana Dokala at the uh, vegetable conference a year or two ago. So blowing it over the top. I had thought about this, but like I said, I'm trying to figure out how to have it be more on the farm, and we don't bale uh, big round bales or anything like that. So it's also kind of hard. I don't really know. I probably could find sources that I would trust of straw, but I don't know anybody near me who I would feel comfortable getting that stuff and blowing it. Um, and this is a pretty specialized piece of equipment also. But if a couple of farmers were to share that or something, that would make a lot of sense. Anyway, yeah, that's about all I got. This is just some ideas going forward. There's a lot of ideas out there, but I was just at the Acres conference in Madison, and this woman gave a great presentation where she's doing a lot of this stuff, and she basically said, I mean, she showed a bunch of studies and said essentially that underneath mulch like that, there's just more activity happening, and she's been able to really reduce her nitrogen fertilizer inputs. So that's kind of exciting to me to think about how you could just get more activity happening under the mulch, which is kind of what this Dutch farmer is also doing. Pretty amazing stuff on a real large professional scale in Holland. But so, I mean, there's that piece of equipment behind him. He's blowing onto the cover crop, kind of like a little magic fermented sauce of lactic acid kind of fermentation. And then that's getting flail chopped, and then behind it, that's getting shallowly incorporated into the soil. Um, but he's also spreading over potatoes, I think, mulch on like a big scale, hundreds of acres kind of thing. Um, but that's kind of exciting to me, some of the work that he's doing. Next year, I planted some rye, um, a different variety called ND Gardener that is supposed to be even bigger growing than the Abruzzo. Um, and it looks like I have a pretty good stand, not as many fields. And in one of the fields, I ripped some strips with a subsoiler and kind of used my single row potato hiller to make a little raised bed, um, free of the rye. And I think maybe next year I'm going to try to see what it would mean to um, that thing I have there, Wild Hope Farm, that comes from that Andrew Mefford book on no-till. Um, but this idea of maybe there could be this crimped rye, and then on top of it, maybe I would add some additional stuff to kind of bolster the amount with some crimped rye. But yeah, that I'm gonna maybe try that this next year, but we'll see how that goes. So anyway, yeah, thanks. I didn't talk too much, but we have some questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I love how farmers are so willing to share like what works and what doesn't work, and hopefully we can help brainstorm some solutions with each other. So does anyone have any questions for Jeff?
Jeff, I have a question about your plans to crimp in between rows of potatoes, if I understood that correctly, that you'd be crimping the rye in between rows.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not planning on putting potatoes there, but I just used the potato hiller to make like a little raised mound,
Oh, got it.
which I might kind of knock down in the spring, but just to let that dry out. And then I'm thinking probably like a cucurbit of some kind
Makes
um,
sense. Yeah.
in there. But yeah, yeah, this is sometimes what I do is I don't really, it's sort of a tractor width maybe between the rows, and I don't really have a way to crimp. So I'm sort of hoping that maybe driving over it numerous times, um, maybe while I'm spreading this other rye over it, um, maybe that will crimp the rye down. But I have had some bad experiences in the past where I've tried to crimp rye and it's just popped back up on me. Um, so I'm a little nervous about that, but I don't really have a way to do it though, other than just kind of driving over it. Um,
Well, I do have access to a crimper that we've used in some of our experiments. It's a little 3-foot crimper that goes on a two-wheel tractor, either a BCS or a Grillo, which is what we have. So let's talk more about, whether we could get that out to you, um, and some other, yeah, possible options.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Jeff, in this system where you'll have the cut and carry mulch down and the crimped rye, are you changing, like, are you adding more nitrogen to the system, or how are you handling the nutrient management?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to have this strip, sort of like I guess what I did way back, a strip where I could um, concentrate fertility right on that strip. That would be like a single row of winter squash or something. So I have a smaller spreader that I can kind of, it almost comes out into like a nice little funnel um, compost. And I can put some other amendments into that. So it's concentrated, to be concentrated right on top of that little strip, you know.
Hey Jeff, this is Rufus from QA Farms. I missed the beginning of your talk, but how many acres was your rye and how much space were you trying to cover?
Yeah. So I think I had three fields that I planted. Each of the fields were a quarter acre, so 3/4 acre. And then I was mostly from maybe a half an acre, I was trying to get that onto a quarter acre. And it wasn't quite enough, was my estimation in the end. I kind of needed, maybe I could have used all three of those fields on the one field. Um, but one of them, I don't know if you saw, I used this kind of buck rake kind of thing where I was raking it and moving it
Yeah, I did
with
see
it.
that. That was awesome.
But I probably could have benefited from using all three fields on the one field, I think.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you sharing, man.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing that. That's great, and appreciate all the pictures. Uh, I did get to see you at Acres, and Helen's presentation was awesome. Uh,
Yeah.
so I bought her book, but I haven't read it yet. But I've tuned into her stuff wherever I found it over the years because it's really inspiring. Although I gotta say I haven't been able to have a lot of success replicating her designs in my own sort of half-assed way. But I used to do grow cover crop rye really big just to try to I would just leave it in place and try to incorporate it, and it was always kind of a mess. And I do it differently now. But we would often have the crop following that would just struggle. Um, and just doing a more diverse mix with it seemed to help that a lot. So when I would sow it in the fall, I'd have all kinds of stuff in there, oats and peas and buckwheat and whatever, and that would all winter kill out of there. But then rye and vetch coming through in the spring seemed like then whatever we planted into that after the fact didn't struggle so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think that I remember that that Jan Hendrik Krop he's not just doing rye in that system. He was doing he was calling it like clover graphs or something, which was maybe a weird translation, but I think I saw once a list and it was like, 20 different species of things in the cover that he's growing and
Yeah.
chopping that. So maybe just having that rye, um, diversifying that could help the subsequent crop, but maybe also the mulch quality as well. I don't know.
Yeah, it might. I don't know. I don't know mulch wise if it makes a big difference or not. But I know
Yeah.
it's been a lot easier for us to get into the field and have a successful following crop yet that fall um, by having the diversity in there.
Hey Jeff, you talked about um, spreading the mulch before planting and then trying it in the other order, planting before mulching. Did you end up having a preference for one over the other?
Um, yeah, I don't know. It seems like, I mean, it was pretty tedious to plant by hand into the blown mulch is kind of what we had to do. So unless there was a way to kind of, we plant usually with a water wheel transplanter is what we typically use. So if there was a way to really use that um, effectively, that would be nice. But otherwise, we were sort of crawling around and planting things, by hand, which is actually what we have to do on that landscape fabric anyway. It goes pretty quick with a big crew, but that's a lot to crawl around on the landscape fabric and get all those peppers in, or squash. I probably should have mentioned we're probably doing 4 or 5 fields covered in landscape fabric. So we do our melons and our winter squash, and then we've been doing peppers because we just haven't been able to weed peppers very well. So we've just found that doing peppers on the fabric is nice. But yeah, so we're using like an acre of the landscape fabric, and I'd like to kind of wean off of that if possible.
We can keep the discussion going if people have more questions, but I would just like to put a plug in. If people can fill out the eval, I just put it in the chat. It's really helpful to know what topics people want to see more of in the future, if this was, how helpful it was for you today. So please fill that out. Oh, thanks. Sorry, new link. I was just told that that link didn't work for people, so hopefully this new one will work.
But yeah, if anybody has any questions about anything that I mentioned, feel free to email me or whatever.
Just a plug for the evaluation as well. We tried to make it really short and to the point, and it really does help, like Emily said, to hear from you on what topics you want to learn more about.